And
And I would,
okay,
okay.
here we go. Hi everyone, it's Abdullah Samir, and I am joined by two lovely guests today. We're having a conversation on the topic of is Islam true? So I'm joined by Abdullah Gondal. I think some of you guys will know him. He's been on channel before. We've had some conversations in the past. He's been involved in some of the videos that we've co-authored together. And we're also joined by a very special guest, Omar Abdul Fatah, director of Ask a Muslim Canada. Now, Omar has actually is also in Canada, so all of us are in Canada. But he lived in Japan for a few years, and he knows Arabic, Japanese, and English, which is quite amazing. Quite amazing, yeah. So,
Thank
would you like to? So, Abdullah Gondal, I guess since you're going to be hosting from now, I'm just gonna be watching. Please go ahead and take over.
So, hello everybody. It's Abdullah Gondal here. I'm happy to be here. This is going to be a very important conversation because it's one of the first or the very few times we actually get to talk with each other in a very nice, generous manner. And these conversations need to happen so that both sides get their ideas and their perspectives out to everyone. And nobody likes a monolith or a monologue, right? So today, like having Omar with us is amazing because he's given a TED talk. He's got about 100,000 views on YouTube. He runs the page Ask a Muslim. Has about
I
100.
didn't even realize that. I didn't even realize I had that
1.5
many views.
He has 1.5 million followers, and he's also been engaging the ex-Muslim community as well. He's made a few videos about atheism and then Islam, and he's also known for propagating a very reasonable approach or a rational approach towards the faith. So that's very, very interesting. So Omar, would you like to add anything that I missed about you? Anything you want to add?
No, honestly, I think I didn't personally, I didn't even realize I had that many followers. I should probably start monetizing my page, but yeah, I don't know. No, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. And I guess people. This is more of a message for the non-Muslim community, and but people see a person like myself, and with a longer beard, and sometimes I think people may be surprised that I even speak English. But I was born and raised here, and so I went to public school here. I get the culture. I English Canadian as my language, as you could say. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it.
Okay, so well, let's get into it. Would you want to tell
Sure.
us about your own story and how you came back to Islam, or like became a more conscious Muslim, as you've said? Would you want to fill us in on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So like a lot of people, I was born and raised in a Muslim family, and I was encouraged to pray, and I was in a Saturday school where we were learning various parts of the Quran, and I never really thought about my faith too much. It was just part of my identity, and I was proud of it. And slowly, I started to become more vocal after 9/11, when people would say, "Oh, Muslims are terrorists, and you're this and you're this," and I said, "Look, I'm in a household where we're taught not even to kill like an ant if it doesn't do anything to you, right? And not even to harm anything, right?" So I started taking a more vocal role there. But my biggest change came when I was living in Japan. I talk about this in my TED Talk, which you can look up if you just search my name. Basically, everything that made me comfortable in my life, my friends, my academic success, I guess you could say, as I finished school at the time, even my language was kind of gone. And the one thing I had left was my faith. So slowly but surely, I basically decided, I was like, look, I'm finding solace in my faith, but I really want to make sure that it's true. I don't just want to adopt or inherit a faith from my parents. So I started reading the Quran, and trying to see if the claims that Muslims made about the truthfulness of Islam would actually hold up. And there were two claims that I came across, but then I realized there was another one that actually is derived from the Quran as well. The first one was that there are no contradictions in the Quran. So I started studying that. I went on Google, and I found a list of 100 and I forgot exactly how much it was, 101 apparent contradictions. And I started going through them, one by one. And I realized, factually, logically speaking, these are not contradictions. And then I went to the scientific argument that, the Quran is not only consistent with science, which now I've kind of developed a different perspective on, but the Quran is not only consistent with science. This was the argument presented to me, but it supersedes science in the fact that things that we only recently discovered were mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. And so what I was really surprised by, I guess you could say, wasn't so much the fact that that was indeed true, but it was the fact that, let's say, I mean, obviously some people say this, that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wrote the Quran himself. It would just be profound to me that if he wrote the Quran 1400 years ago himself, that it would just randomly happen to coincide with everything that we know about science today. And I know some people disagree with this. They say that there are scientific errors in the Quran. My approach when people present these to me is, I don't just want to hear one person. I don't want to hear one scholar say this. I don't want a Google article. I want, like, show me where you're getting the evidence that it's factually incorrect. So basically, I started looking at that, and then I was like, okay, so there's something here. And then I started really analyzing the message of Islam, and that really is that there's one God, belief in all the prophets, and the Quran and the Injil and the Torah and the Zabur and other scriptures as holy scriptures. And then I started really looking at other scriptures as well. I started studying the Bible and looking at evidence for evolution and the Big Bang Theory and things like that. And all of that, I felt like really solidified my faith, because it was in line with the message of Islam, that there is a creator, he is one, and that all these prophets came with the same message. And I saw that same message in the Bible, in the Torah, I guess in the Old Testament, you could say, and the like. So that was kind of my journey. And my experience in Japan kind of changed my path altogether. Before I was considering, law school, but now I'm pursuing the path of teaching. So,
Okay.
yeah. I don't want to talk too much, so you can respond.
Yes.
Hopefully.
It's actually interesting. Like my own story. Like when I was 15, I became super religious, and that's back in Pakistan, right? I'd go to the mosque, I would give the azan, I would lead the salah for a bit. I was kind of like the de facto imam if the imam left for like a vacation. I was doing all that, cleaning the mosque even. And then I remember I had converted one lady to Islam in Pakistan, and then when I came to Canada, I was super religious. I gave the khutbah at the MSA for about 2 years regularly, converted another person to Islam, and then it was a little after that when I actually started analyzing. And because you come from a society like Pakistan, which is sort of centered around religion, and it's almost like a monologue. So it was the first time here when I got exposed to criticisms, and in my search to answer those questions against Islam, I started finding things and issues with the Quran itself that made me eventually lose my faith. So there's a similarity there. At the same time, like you raised the question of science in the Quran. Now, I would disagree with you in a point where a lot of the verses that we see, or a lot of the Quranic statements that we see that are about science, are very vague, and there seems to be a lot of post hoc rationalization that goes on. Then also that a lot of these claims that the Quran seems to be saying, a lot of these claims have been made by people before Muhammad, so it kind of nullifies the miraculous or uniqueness of the Quran itself. And I've also noticed that if you cherry pick or select a few verses that might seem to align with modern science, it can backfire really badly. And you can then conversely point out scientific errors in the Quran. And this has been a trend in a modern Muslim apologetics too, where you see like leading people like Hamza Sources, Asadullah Ali, Ayer as a whole organization, they have moved away from this scientific miracles in the Quran, and they actually have called it as an embarrassment for some Muslims as well to propagate such a view. So, for example, what would be your most strongest point, one of the most strongest scientific claims that the Quran makes that compels you to believe it could not have been from anybody else than God?
So I definitely can kind of see where you're coming from with your points. My approach because the Quran doesn't say that, and if you are in doubt about this book, then obviously compare it to modern science and you can see that it's the truth. Like, I've never encountered any verse like that, right? So what Dr. Yasser Qadi has said is that we don't necessarily see them as scientific miracles, but we see it as the language of the Quran. Like you said, they can be, I guess, vague or interpreted in different ways. The language of the Quran allows it to be consistent with modern science. Now, somebody like myself who's taken like for example, the philosophy of Darwinism course at one of the best universities in Canada. What we realize and what made Thomas Kuhn so popular is that science goes through these different paradigm shifts, right? So at one time, people thought that the Earth was the center of the universe, and now we no longer think that, right? So I don't think it's a very, and like you said, like I don't think it's a very, I don't think it's the foundational approach or the Sunnah or the tradition of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to to present these scientific arguments and say, look, this must be from God. But in regards to one thing that really struck with me, and I know a lot of people say that there's evidence we knew these things during previous generations and stuff like that. But one thing that struck with me when I first discovered it is the verse أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلينظر الإنسان مما خلق من ماء دافق. So let man see, let man observe from what he was created. He was created from a fluid emerging يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب, emerging from between the backbone and the ribs. And the first time I saw this, I was like, okay, how can we? Sperm does not come from between the backbone and the ribs, right? So I was like, how can we understand this? And the more I studied it, I read one person's explanation of this, and he said and this is correct. It doesn't say that sperm emerges from between the backbone and the ribs. It says ma'in dafiq, because sperm, there is a word for sperm in the Quran, and that's maniyin yumna, right? That word is present in the Quran, but the Quran says ma'in dafiq, a fluid emerging. And I studied this and I started looking at this and I was like, okay, where does the majority of sperm, like what is the majority of sperm? The majority of sperm is fluid. And where does this actual fluid that makes up semen come from? It comes from the seminal vesicle. And where's the seminal vesicle? It's in the pelvis. And the pelvis is indeed between the backbone and the ribs. It's actually attached to the end of that backbone, and it comes up between the ribs. So when I started looking at that, I was like, okay, that's pretty fascinating. But then again, these days I don't rely my faith on the scientific nature of the Quran. I think it adds to it, because obviously if it indeed was from God and God created everything and there are clear factual scientific errors in it, then how could that be, right? So that's kind of my approach to understanding. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, interesting. So like my take on that verse is interesting in a way where if you look at how Muhammad understood it, like there's a hadith that goes in Sahih Bukhari where I think one of the Jewish rabbis comes to him and asks him about the things that a prophet would only knew, and then Muhammad explains that the hereditary parts work because the man's ejaculate takes overpowering of the female ejaculate. So whoever's ejaculation is overpowering the other one is the one who the child's going to resemble. And also, if you read Ibn Kathir or the tafsirs, you also see a different approach to it, where they say, okay, the where it says that half water comes from the sternum of the woman, and then half of it is the man. But what's also peculiar, the Quran constantly, when making claims about reproduction and biology or embryology, completely misses out the egg. And the female egg is almost nowhere to be found or mentioned. And then when we actually look back at Galen or the Greeks of the time, you see a remarkable similarity in what the Quran claimed and what they had claimed. So what I see this as is a projection of the knowledge of the time. And if you want to go further into like the embryological miracle claim about the flesh and the bone, it's actually almost copied over from Galen, and it even copies the mistake of like the bones and the flesh, like the bones appearing and then being clothed by flesh. And a lot of embryologists, apart from Keith Moore, a lot of embryologists have disputed that clearly. So I see this as a projection of the knowledge of the time. But then a lot of Muslims that propagate the science views, what they're doing is they're trying to pick out modern science understandings and using post hoc rationalizations to project it onto the Quran to somehow fix it in. And that's the problem where I find it, that most modern Muslim apologists say that we shouldn't be even going near the scientific approach and applying it in the Quran, because the Quran just isn't a science book. Its message was for that time period in a way, and was reflecting the knowledge that would appeal to the people of that time. Because, for example, if Allah would be talking about certain cosmological claims, that we now understand, like special relativity, general relativity, the people in that time were like the guys talking nonsense because to them their knowledge was not advanced enough, right? Uh, but all in all, it just looks like a book of its time. Now, uh, like I've heard you make a claim about the Big Bang being in the Quran. What is your opinion on it so far? Have you changed, or do you still say that verse 2130 is
Verse
still
2130, yeah.
Yeah.
So just in I guess so just one thing I wanted to add it from before. And this is a claim. So I've actually really tried to look into this from impartial resources to say, okay, like I know I've heard the claim that the Quran's description of the embryonic development is incorrect, and I've tried to actually locate like impartial resources, not from Muslims, not from non-Muslims, but literally like I don't know, Britannica, and obviously every source has its subjectivity. But I tried to look into this, and I could never identify or find anything that clearly says that what's in the Quran is wrong. And I'm still on that search. I'm thinking of contacting maybe professors at various institutions and say, can you clarify something? But so that's kind of where I'm at in that regard. And in regards to the hadith, I would appreciate it because I don't recall I recall coming across one hadith where
I'll try to find it for you.
Yeah, please, I would appreciate that. Because I recall coming across a different hadith where there was the issue of cheating going on, and then so it was like about determining how the child would look. But that's the only thing I recall in similar to that. In regards to 2130, so when I guess I haven't really thought about how my thoughts have changed about that verse in too long, but the verse says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أفلو أفلم يرى الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا ففتقناهما. Have those who not disbelieved considered that the heavens and the earth were once a joined entity, and then we caused them and we split them asunder. So I think that seems to me now, as I think about it, like rationally and logically, it seems to be quite in line with scientific understanding of how the universe was made, in the sense that everything was kind of one at a point, and then things were split asunder. What the cause is, obviously, there's differences of opinions about, but everything was one, and then there was a split, and now the universe continues to expand at a fairly rapid rate. So that's kind of how I see that. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, when you actually look at the verse 2130, it says that the earth was split, kanata ratqan, from the heavens. Like it mentions the word ard. So it also is then it could be used to imply that the earth was existing at the time of the Big Bang, whereas we now know that the earth came into existence billions of years later, right? So there's that part. And so that's what I'm trying to say. Like it kind of projects modern science, tries to fit and mold it into what we can understand, kind of what we call confirmation bias. But what's also interesting is if you look at the mythologies of the past, they also echo the same kind of creation myth. If I remember, like the Sumerians had this one, and the Romans and the Greeks, or there's this tribe, the Karachi of Africa. There's a tribe too, and even the separation myth of the Chinese was also similar to this, that the heavens and the earth were joined together and then split asunder. And they go into more detail where, it's all water. And then the Quran also echoes a little bit of that. I think in Surah Hud, verse 7 it is, where Allah's throne was floating upon the water before the universe existed. So,
That's wrong.
So when you think about it, like it's not anything unique the Quran is saying, and it's not really precise in its terminology. It's saying that the earth and the heavens were joined together. Okay, then what do you mean by the heavens? And then what do you mean by the earth? Are you saying all of matter was joined together? So there's a lot of ambiguity in the verse, right?
Yeah.
So these kind of issues pop up in my head, and that's why I don't buy into the claims of projecting these verses as scientific miracles in any sense.
Yeah.
For example, like if you follow from that, if you look at Surah Fussilat, I believe Surah 41, between verses 9 and 12, when it mentions the chronology of how everything was created. It says that the earth was created first and then the stars were put in the sky. It got the creation chronology wrong. So here you have the Quran in conflict with modern science in ways that can't be reconciled. So what's your view on that?
Well, from my understanding, there's two verses. There's chapter 79, and then in Surah An-Nazi'at, where Allah talks about how the ordering, and in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah also talks about the ordering as well. And so how it can be reconciled, I think, fairly easily. But before going into that, I would just say that, when it comes to modern science, and we say things like 5.6 billion years ago, and then the Earth came in, and then the universe came in. I would say these are basically guesstimates, right? And they may be based on logic, but it's not like we observed when these happen, right? We're going by our best assumption of how things worked, right? So, and that's why I don't think I don't think a logical approach to science is to say that this is definitely the truth, but this is how we perceive the truth today based on what we know, right? Because science is constantly changing. In regards to these verses, I would say that the Quran says, هو الذي خلق من في الأرض أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. It helps me when I remember the Arabic first and then I translate it. هو الذي خلق من في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى على العرش ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات. So he created everything on the earth altogether, and then he went to the heavens and he created سبع سماوات. Now the verses in Surah An-Nazi'at, they say that Allah created basically where the apparent contradiction appears is when Allah says وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ طَحَاهَا, right? And after that, Allah spread the earth. He spread the earth. وَأَخْرَجَ مِنْهَا مَاءَهَا وَمَرْعَاهَا. So people say, well, here it says that the earth came second, but here it says that the earth came first. The earth did come first, and then the heavens were created, and then Allah split, I guess he spread the earth, and then water emerged, and then that's when everything came out. Water came out. In regards to the scientific inaccuracy, I would just say that, I mean, I personally don't take what science says today as 100% being absolute, because if we read, for example, Darwin's book, we could talk about evolution later, but if we read Darwin's book, even Darwin didn't really have a full understanding of how, inheritance works. Like, he thought there was a process of pangenesis, I believe he called it, and where gemmules were transferred from one thing to another. But we didn't really know how inheritance worked until Mendel's tea plant experiments. So I would just say that I wouldn't say here's what science says, so that means the Quran must be wrong. The way I look at it, and this is my personal opinion, is that this is what science says today, and science goes through these constant paradigm shifts. And potentially, what science says today will not be what science says tomorrow, and we've seen that in the past. So.
Okay, well, there's a distinction I want to make here before we go forward. The hypotheses change, theories might tinker a little bit, but concrete facts don't change. You're not going to have science suddenly say that the Earth is not a sphere; it's flat or it's square all of a sudden. Like, those facts will stay there. We know from how the universe functions, the fact that, first, like, early universe didn't have any stars and matter coalesced, and then stars were formed, and then nuclear fission happened, and then around those stars debris collected, and then the planets came by. And I mean, everybody knows that stars evolved way before planets, so I honestly see this like as a contradiction in modern science, where it stays standing in conflict, saying that the Earth was created first, and then the heavens were created, and then the nearest heaven was adorned with stars. And I think that's what it's. Let me read Surah Fussilat.
I'm using my phone right now, so I can't look up the ayahs. So I can check them afterwards. But
so it says in 41:9, say those who disbelieve, he created the earth in 2 days. And then in the next verse, it says that he gave the sustenance and created the creatures and everything in the earth. Then he directed himself to the heaven while it was smoke, and said to the earth, come willingly or by compulsion, and they came willingly. And then he completed them as 7 heavens. And then he adorned the nearest heaven with lamps as protection. And we'll get into the stars being protections and lamps a little later. But this is like in conflict with modern science. So you would rather take the Quranic cosmological claim over the cosmology of science completely here?
Well, what I would say is I would first analyze both, because obviously an English translation is not 100%. I've never seen an English translation. I've seen some that are very close, but I'd have to look at the actual Arabic itself before I can make that conclusion. And then I have to look at what modern science says about it. But I personally don't see things like, because if we look at, for example, like Google, when was the Earth created? If you type that in, you'll see it gives you a range, and there's like a variation of like, let's say 4 billion years, which is a long time, right? So I would personally say, yeah, 3 point. Well, my point is there's still some variation, right? So it's not something that we've directly observed. We're making our best guess of it, and we have to realize that at one point people thought that the universe was eternal, right? And there was the idea that the universe was not expanding or still. So my, I guess the way I see it is, in my point in my life, after kind of putting the Quran through a scrutinous, like quite fairly scrutinized test, and seeing kind of like, okay, what does this book say? And just seeing over and over again, this is just my experience, seeing the Quran over and over again being reaffirmed through my tests, I've come to realize that, it doesn't really matter what modern theories say about things that we can't directly observe. I would personally rather take the Quran over after putting it through this scrutinized test.
Okay. I mean, we have evidence, like we can use carbon dating and
Of course,
fluorine dating and all sorts of dating. We can still approximate it into a very close range. We're not saying that it was created like 13 billion years ago alongside the Big Bang, like the Quran seems to propagate. It was definitely created after. I mean, do you agree with that part at least?
To be honest with you, I haven't studied this in as much detail to say that the Earth was definitely created after the universe. But I don't see how we can be so definite about such a thing that happened so long ago.
I mean, we have lots of different evidence, but I want to be stuck on this topic specifically. Now, I want to move on to the stars itself, right? Now, the Quran also propagates this idea that the stars are in the nearest heaven, amongst the seven heavens. Now, just before we get into more detail, seven heavens was understood in a multitude of ways. Like Ibn Kathir says, there's seven planets. Then some people say, no, it's the seven different universes. The whole universe is the first heaven. And some people say that there's the seven layers of the atmosphere. There's a whole separate debate. But the stars being adorned as lamps and then as protection, like in 67:5 it says وَجَعَلْنَاهَا رُجُومًا لِلشَّيَاطِينِ. And then in Surah Safat it echoes that. Then in Surah Jinn between verses 15 and 18 it says that the shooting stars especially is when genies would go up to the heaven, jinns, and would eavesdrop on a heavenly conversation with the angels. The angel will realize, oh, we're being heard, and then they'll throw those stars at the genies to scare them away. Now, when you think about that explanation, it sounds very weird and absurd, and is in great conflict with what we understand about what meteors or shooting stars are. And like, they're not even stars. In fact, they're just pieces of rock that enter our atmosphere and burn up. So when you think about this, it seems like Muhammad was living at a time where he's trying to make sense of what he possibly could, and he's using all the available knowledge. So in this sense, does it actually seem like is that God revealing that to him, or is that him making those claims and trying to make sense of reality? Because that seems like a very weird claim that shooting stars are chasing genies because they eavesdrop on a heavenly conversation.
Well, I think if we look at, well, first of all, as Muslims, the Quran is very clear that وَيُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, like we believe in the unseen. So for example, you could say, well, there's no actual physical proof that heaven and hell exist. And I would say, well, yeah, we can't see them. Like, how am I supposed to touch heaven or hell, right? But we believe in it based off of the Quran, which is something that's tangible and we can read. So I'm not necessarily surprised that, there is that mention of these conversations in the heavens. It's just something that we don't see. Just like we can't outright see Allah, it doesn't mean we don't believe in him. In regards to, I guess the second part of your question was, sorry, can you just remind me one more time about just the specific aspect you wanted me to comment on?
Oh, because it's in conflict with our understanding of what shooting stars actually are, right? Like, for example, tafsirs like Jalalain or the Hadith in Tirmidhi and Bukhari say that shooting stars are actually stars that are literally thrown or pelted by the angels at the jinns because they were hearing their conversations. And then Jalalain takes a different approach where he says that it's a part of a star that detaches and follows the genie like a flame or almost like a missile, you could say. So I mean, we obviously know that shooting stars aren't even stars or parts of a star. In fact, they're meteors and rocks burning in the lowest, closest layer of, in our atmosphere. So how does that reconcile with that?
Mm.
understanding of modern science. And then secondly, the Quran says that we have adorned the nearest heaven with the stars. How do you make sense of that? Because then is the nearest heaven the layer of the atmosphere, or is it the whole universe?
وَزَيَّنَّا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيحَ.
Yeah.
Yeah, so first, when I look at tafsir like Jalalain and Ibn Kathir, uh, these scholars, and I truly do say I do believe and I respect them, like with the utmost respect, because they were trying with their knowledge, their best knowledge at the time. But their word, no Muslim takes the word of any particular scholar, one of them, as definite knowledge of what it is. This is their opinion, and then we analyze it with what we know today and then what other people have said. So just because they were wrong doesn't necessarily mean much. But in terms of like that verse about وَزَيَّنَّا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيحَ, it specifies the Sama' al-Dunya. Now, what kind of stars or the nature of shooting stars or anything like that, or what is even beyond like this universe that we see, like we're still exploring that. We're still exploring even what is on our own Earth. Like last time I checked, over 95% of the Earth's ocean floor is undiscovered. So I think there's a lot of things that we've yet to discover, and maybe that verse. I don't know. I want to again look at the particular verse in the Arabic, and so right now I'm using my phone, so I can't use my phone to look it up. But I would look into that verse and potentially see other explanations of it. And that's one of the beautiful things, and the Quran mentions this, right? There's وأخرى متشابهات. Allah says هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب. He is the one who sent down upon you the book, and of the book are certain verses that are muhkamat, like they are the jurisprudence, they're clear cut, and they are the mother of the book. And then other verses, they calls them mutashabihat, verses that can have multiple interpretations. So this could be one of those verses, right? And then Allah says, إن الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه. Indeed, those people in whose hearts, those people in whose hearts is like a sense of deviation, they follow that which is kind of like can be interpreted in multiple ways, seeking to make it, seeking an explanation that fits with their own accord, and seeking to make it seem like a trial. So there are verses in the Quran certainly that can be interpreted in multiple ways, like the verse about, for example, Dhul Qarnayn, when he goes to a place and the sun sets. And Ibn Kathir, even if you take his explanation, he said obviously this is not what people say. Anybody can see this when they go to the beach and they see the sun setting, right? So there are verses that can be interpreted in multiple ways, and Allah says only Allah knows their true explanation. But the believers, like myself, we say all of it is from God, and that's good. That's good enough for us, because the ones that we can test and the ones that we are sure of, that's really enough for us, and that's the way I see it.
Okay, so you brought up Dhul Qarnayn, and that's a very peculiar topic, because with Dhul Qarnayn, the 1886, where the sun is setting in a murky pond, when you look at the interpretation of the first 400 or 500 years of Islamic scholarship and exegesis, you see them actually believing it to be literal. You see Tabari, great scholar, who actually thinks that it's actually going in a pond, and he brings hadiths to support that view. And we actually have two Sahih hadith, one in Abu Dawud, and then one was by Sheikh Al-Ambani in Silsilat al-Sahiha, that tell you that yes, Muhammad was riding a donkey with Abu Dhar, was one of his Sahabi, and then Muhammad asked him, "Do you know where the sun goes?" And he says, "Allahu alam, Rasul, and Allah knows best." And then he says, "Indeed, it goes into the pond and stuff." And
it says it goes under the arsh, from what I recall that hadith.
There's two different ones. So there's one that says it goes under the arsh, it stops as a sajda to Allah, then asks his permission to come up again. Now that itself is very contradictory, because it never really stops anywhere, because the earth is a globe and ellipsoid. But then there's the hadith that continues on. There's two Sahih narrations. One's Sahih in chain, and the other is in Silsilat al-Sahih, which said that Muhammad affirmed the literal setting of the sun into a murky pond. If you want to see it, I actually found that one. I can screen share it with you. Let me just.
Yes, please. And then I can check out the Arabic and see different narrations of it as well.
Okay. Perfect. So I'll just show you that. So this is the one. If you can see, this is from Sahih al-Jami al-Saghir.
What is that book?
It's from Sheikh Al-Albani. It's a collection of Sahih hadith, and he's graded the narrations right next to it, Sahih or not. It says, هل تنظرون أين تغرب هذه تغرب في أين حامية from Abi Dhar, which means that it goes and
Yeah.
sits in a pond of murky or boiling water.
What's the sorry? This book is what book again?
Sahih al-Jami' al-Saghir. It's from I think Sheikh al-Ambani. He compiled. It's a part. He takes the Sahih hadiths from the 6 Sahih and more. So like Musnad Ahmad, Musnad Abdul Razak, and all the other books, and he puts them all together. And it's like a compilation. This is
So
one,
that
but there's another one. I'll actually
Yeah.
see if I can find that one. This one, yeah. So this is in Sunan Abu Dawud as well.
Yeah.
You can see the highlighted part. It says فَإِنَّهَا تَغْرُبُ فِي عَيْنٍ حَامِيَةٍ, that it sets in a spring of warm water.
Yeah.
And this seems to incline towards a more literal understanding of the verse 1886.
I would say, like, we have to be careful with how we interpret things, especially from 1400 years ago. So the way I see it, and we have to see how like Arabs at the time would have interpreted it. So is he wrong by saying that it does indeed set into, like, if you look at it, it does indeed set into a spring of murky water? Does it literally mean that it is literally going in? Because if we think about the size of the sun, and I don't think this would have been too hard to figure out, how could the sun possibly fit into a spring of murky water, right?
Well,
so yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, but then also, like, if you look at if you read Tabari itself, and I think it's volume, the one about its creation, I think it's volume 2, and it's pages 140 something. It says that the sun is carried on chariots, and it goes into this murky spring, and then it goes underneath the earth, does the sajda under the Allah's arsh, and it comes back out again. And Tabari, as you know, is like a great exegete of the Quran. Like, nobody comes near to him. And he then supports his view using these hadiths too. So one is perplexed, like Muhammad is echoing the understanding of the time, and also the idea of hamia, the boiling water, is also attributed to the sun going in and boiling the water itself. It's only much later is when the normative view that the earth isn't actually flat and then the sun is actually huge later on becomes more relevant, is when these interpretations change. Now, one of the other things I found in this was Tafsir al-Jalalain, when it says about 8820 وَإِلَى الْأَرْضِ كَيْفَ سُطِحَتْ. I'll actually screen share you that one too so you can see it. It's this one. So here, Jalalain tells us that most people, this was written in the 15th century, most people at that time of the revealed law believed that the earth was flat, and they would induce this from the Quran and Sunnah. But it doesn't still it says it's okay to hold the other view as well, but most solid view of scholars of the religion was that the earth is flat, right? And it circles back to the point that I was making, is the Quran actually doesn't have any real science in it. It's actually mostly a projection of the understanding of people of the time. And then what we're doing now is we know that it conflicts with modern understanding, and now we have to come back and try to make it reconcile with it.
So if I may respond to some of these. So just obviously, like I said, the interpretation of scholars, they were doing the best at their time. And so if they, and I, for example, I've seen, for example, Ibn Kathir's explanation of the verse, وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ, and we are its expanders. He says Allah is able to expand it, right? He was going by the knowledge that he had, and they're going by the knowledge that they had at the time. To me, one of the beautiful things about this is that the Quran is presented in a way, and I know people might say, like, well, why is that? But the Quran is presented in a way that its meaning can be broad enough to encompass different scientific paradigms. So at the time, if people thought that it was flat, they could use this verse to say, maybe, okay, well, the Quran is they could use the verse to say that, okay, the earth is flat based off their knowledge. But for people like myself, like, imagine, for example, if 1400 years ago, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, the earth is actually, it's a sphere. Was the majority thinking that it was a sphere? No. If people thought that, if somebody heard that, they'd be like, oh, this guy is definitely crazy. Like, no, we're not going to believe in him. But it, like you said, it was presented, and I agree with you on this point, that it was presented to a people so that they could understand it. But at the same time, the beauty of it is that it can be interpreted, and these aren't these aren't far extending interpretations. The Quran can be easily interpreted to accommodate different areas, different places, different phases of time. And when it comes to like the scientific miracles, again, I don't necessarily see them. I don't paint it as scientific miracles because that's not the wording of the Quran. But the way I see it is that there are verses in the Quran that clearly, like they can be observed and they can be attested whether they're right or wrong. And let's say, in my opinion, and what I've seen, 100% of these verses that we can actually observe are correct. They are consistent with what we know.
Well, I mean, that's where I disagree with you, where you're saying that verses that can be interpreted with science seem to be 100% correct, but like I'm showing you the verses that actually are making claims about science that don't align with science. You say that, oh, reinterpretation will make it go away. It's kind of like hiding or playing a cat and mouse game, where anything that matches with science, it's, oh, subhanallah, but anything that doesn't, we're going to use interpretation to somehow skew it. But there's no objectivity to it, and that's why we should leave the Quran and not put any science in it whatsoever, because like I said, it can backfire. Like, I'll give you one more you know about Sheikh Uthaymeen, right? Like,
I've heard, yeah, the more modern, yeah,
famous scholar, like, and he wrote a book. I'll screen share this as well, because this is very staggering, and this is a very recent opinion of him. In his Fatawa al-Uthaymeen, he goes out of his way to explain that the sun actually goes around the earth and not the other way. He promotes a geocentric view, if you can see this. Let me make the screen bigger. And there's a whole like explanation where he goes over this, saying that the sun is actually going around the earth. This proves that both of them are moving and revolving around the earth. For if it were the earth that revolved around them, the moon would not be following the sun. And he then is using if you can see, like,
I can't actually read that, but
yeah, no problem. Like, I can send you the post later on, but there's verses and hadiths that he's using to derive this opinion, and he uses the exact kind of words too, the hadith we were talking about earlier, as well. Like, it goes under the arsh and stuff.
Yeah.
And he says on the commentary, and so it is quite clear from his words, return from where you came, that it is the sun that revolves around the earth, and it is due to its revolution that the sunrise and sunset occur. Whereas in fact, we know that it's quite the opposite. That's what's happening in reality. So how would you understand these blatant conflicts between the Quranic cosmology and modern science?
So, with all due respect to Sheikh Uthaymeen, he's not a scientist. he's a legal scholar. He's not a scientist. So I'm not going to go and learn science from him, like just logic, right? That's pretty much the way I see it. So when it comes to these verses that, like I said, they can be interpreted in multiple ways, I think logically they can be interpreted in a way that accommodates the modern paradigm. But I'm not going to go and take the definite statements of scholars in the past who aren't physical scientists and use them as say, this is actually what Allah means, because who can speak for Allah, right, other than himself? And that's the Islamic belief. So
then wouldn't you say that even the best of scholars and the most advanced people in Arabic linguistics weren't able to understand Allah's word correctly enough, and that Allah misled people or gave a message that was so unclear that it gave completely opposing views on reality for 14 centuries? Wouldn't that look bad on an omniscient God not being clear enough?
No, as the verse that I've told you earlier, chapter 3, verse 7, Allah says, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب. He has sent down the book. Of it are the verses that are clear cut. Like, there's no doubt about them. قل هو الله أحد. You can't interpret that in more than one way. Say he is Allah the one. لم يلد ولم يولد. He's not begotten, nor does he begotten, nor is he begotten. These are the foundations of Islam. All these other things, like the stories and the stories of Dhul Qarnayn and the things about astronomy, maybe they can be. I'll give you that. Some verses certainly can be, because Allah says it in the Quran. They can be interpreted in multiple ways, but they don't make or break someone's faith. in the in
Okay.
Tawheed, in the fundamentals of Islam.
Okay, but then earlier in the video, didn't you say that science and the Quran making these scientific proclamations that align with modern science that nobody could have known back in the day? You were using that as evidence for Islam, but now
That
that
was in my journey at the time. That was
okay,
my journey at the time. I don't
okay,
go and say this today. I
okay,
think I use it as an added thing that say it's kind of a little bit profound in my opinion, but I
mhm,
don't say that Islam is true because it's consistent with science. That's not my
okay,
fundamental argument.
okay, and also then I would ask, isn't it also circular reasoning to then use Quranic verses to then explain away these discrepancies? You're using the Quran, if there's a discrepancy with science or understanding of our reality, oh, the Quran says it's supposed to be like that. Isn't that circular logic?
Uh, no, just I'm just responding to what you said about like how God would try to like mislead a bunch of people, but he clearly says that there are some verses that are clear cut. There's no, you can't misinterpret them, and there's other verses that can be up to interpretation, but they are not, I guess you could say, the foundations of the religion. Like when Allah says,
Mhm.
"حُرِّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ لَحْمُ الْخَنْزِيرِ," the flesh of the swine. That's it. These are muhkamat, like these
Okay.
are jurisprudence. So that's kind of, I don't use that circular. I would not consider that circular
But then
reasoning.
doesn't Allah say that He's explained His book, Mufassilul Ayat, and then in
So
Surah 54, Surah Qamar, it goes into detail
yeah,
saying, repeating the phrase that,
مفسر الآيات لقوم, yeah,
and then,
for people, and he describes them in different ways. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And then it also says that it's a book that for people who think it's very clear.
yeah.
So that seems like a very contradictory, like kind of place that some verses that are fine to you subjectively, they're amazing, they're clearly explained, but then
Mm.
some of them that don't align with modern understanding of Islam and science, those are pushed away into the mutashabihat, you say, the doubts, right?
Yeah,
And
some
there's
verses, I
no
mean,
left alone.
for example, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. You won't find too many people, even though the verse says that, you won't find too many people who literally say Allah is literally the light of the sun.
Yeah.
Right? You won't find. So obviously, some verses they have to be interpreted in certain ways. But just to go back to like, there's the way I see it, and how many people have said it is that it's a book of signs. So Allah directs you to certain signs, like أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Do they not look at how the camel it was made? Right? So things like that. And for me, when I read verses like this, and like, Allah directs you to the alteration of the night and day, and then, the phases of the moon and stuff like that. These make sense to me. They like, and again, these are verses. Allah doesn't say that they're verses for everyone. He doesn't say that they're signs for everyone. لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يُؤْمِنُونَ. These are verses for people who believe that there is something out there. So what you and I may be looking at the same thing, and I would say, oh my God, mashallah, tabarakallah, and you might say, science is great,
Okay.
like, you know what I mean?
So basically, what you're saying is you're presupposing the Quran as the word of God,
Mm,
and then that presupposition overrides every other thing that might contradict the Quran, because you're presuppose that the Quran says something about science or whatever about reality. The Quran wins despite not giving evidence for its claims, whereas somebody who's making scientific claims, despite giving lots of evidence,
mm.
is still wrong because the Quran is your presupposition. Is that
No,
correct?
no.
No.
So just to go back to the Quran being the preposition as the word of God, the one claim that we make as Muslims, and this comes from the Quran itself, and it says, if you are in doubt about this book's divine nature, then produce a chapter like it, which we can get into.
Oh, perfect.
But so that's the one claim that I express because that comes from the Quran itself. Now, when it comes to science and all these other things and dinosaurs and aliens and all this, whatever, like anything that were presented, Allah says, when he describes the people, he says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Indeed, with time, mankind is at loss. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Except for those people who believe and do good and encourage people towards truth and encourage people towards patience. So whatever truth is out there, I encourage it open-heartedly and open-mindedly. Like if somebody's saying, look, there are dinosaurs, if somebody says, look, the earth is actually flat or the earth is circular, whatever it may be, whatever people say, I say, okay, give me your evidence, let's talk about it. Right? So Muslims are people who encourage towards truth. They don't hide away from it. They don't shy away from it. That's my understanding of the faith.
Okay, so you wanted, I understand that. Now you wanted to talk about like the Surah like it challenge, like bring a chapter
Yeah.
like it. Now,
Yeah.
that challenge itself is so arbitrary and subjective, and I've been actually doing a lot of research on it. I recited some chapters like it in some videos, and I've
I saw that.
analyzed, and I just made a recent video about the called the Meccan Poet, was uploaded on Samir's channel as well, where I recite some pre-Islamic poetry, some contemporary poetry of Muhammad, and then also there's a part 2 coming where I'll analyze the challenge itself in great detail in regards to how Muhammad was inventing words or forcing rhymes. The problem, first of all, like I'll start with, is the surah like a challenge. The Quran doesn't give a standard what it should be judged by. Okay. Secondly, the Quran then says that it says Arabian Mubin, which is clear Arabic.
Arabian movement, yeah.
Yeah, where some scholars say it's pure Arabic. Now, if you notice, like in Surah Tin, it says
Senior,
"Wat-tini wa zaytun wa turi sinin." Okay,
yeah.
but then in other verses in Surah 23, Surah Mu'minun, I think Surah verse 19 or 17, it says Turi Sina. The sinin and the sina are the same word. The spelling has been changed to sinin just to force a rhyme there. Okay. Then there's the same problem with Ilyas and Ilyasin, which it changes within a span of 15 verses in the same surah, and between 37:123 and 37:133, I believe. Where Salamun ala Ilyas, and then it becomes, I think, to Ilyasin to just hold the rhyme.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to bring it back to at the end is, can I also force rhymes like this without being criticized when I'm attempting this role like a challenge? Secondly, the Quran uses a lot of foreign vocabulary. Now, granted, there are foreign words and loan words in every language. This reminds you, will come to the inherent subjectivity of the challenge by using an artistic form of human expression, that is language, to concoct a challenge. And then the problem gets worse is when Muhammad invents Arabic words himself to hold these rhymes on purpose. Like is in Surah 80:31, it says Abba is a word that there has no meaning. He just put that word in there and it's said to be
Abba.
grass. Then there's the word qaswara. There's a word zanjabil, tasneem.
Al-Jabila.
Yeah, tasneem and Surah Insan. And there's 2, 3 words that are all foreign, are all invented. Sometimes they're not even used before the Quran ever, and they're used to hold rhymes. Okay. So again, I'll come back. Can I make and invent words and then also borrow words from different languages and attach meanings to it to make a surah like it, right? I can like use half a sentence in English and then one word from Urdu or Persian, and there you go. Or like half Arabic and then one word from Urdu that makes a rhyme better. Then also, there are parts of the Quran, I'll give you, they're very, very eloquent and very well written, but there are other parts that are very similar to soothsayers of the time, and that's what the Meccans of the time noticed, and that's why they called him a kahin and a soothsayer. And even Marjan van Putten, who's a very, very big scholar on this subject, also said that, listen, there are amazing, striking, and palpable similarities between, like, let's say, the beginning of Surah Mursalat or Surah Adiyat with Musalma's poetry. And then another problem occurs is, can I use Quranic phraseology to use within that challenge? Because when you actually look at the pre-Islamic poems like the Muallaqat or some pre-Islamic poetry, like one of the surah that are cited, we call the Surah Sharik, it literally talks about the knocking star. It uses phrases, one najm al-tariq, layl al-ghasiq, all these words. So you can counter that point and say, wait, was Muhammad copying from the poets too? Or you can be more nuanced and say, okay, well, when you limit a person to a certain language, you're bound to have the same expressions repeat over and over, right? And that's normal, that's inevitable, because the rules of linguistics have this entailing. Then another problem is, like, Arabic now itself has evolved so much since the 7th century. Can we use modern Arabic to meet the challenge? So all in all, what I wanted to get to at the end was that there's so much subjectivity and arbitrariness in the Quran itself when it comes to this. And then there's the problem of iltifat, like changing pronouns, where Allah would jump from he to we or singular to plural. If a normal Arab person were to talk like that, he'd be vehemently criticized for not knowing Arabic. So when I think about it in reality, the challenge, it doesn't make much sense because it's centered around a linguistic claim. And what also bothers me is this God who's omnipotent, was doing jaw-dropping miracles in the past, like bending the laws of physics, would leave us a subjective linguistic claim of language as his biggest miracle for the end till the end of times. It just doesn't add up. I'll have your take on it.
So when it comes to just the first thing that you mentioned about like Waturi Sinin and Sinai, I mean, with Arabic, you have mu'min and mu'minin. And I just think that we need to be quite careful when we impose, I guess, our understandings of language onto 14th, I guess, 7th century Arabic. And I'll give you just a very, very, I guess, modern example in my life. Like when I learned Japanese, I used to live in Japan for 2 years, and I learned Japanese. Right away, I started to notice drastic differences between English and Japanese. For example, in English, if you're talking about the weather, you'd have to say, "Oh, it's so hot out," or "It's so hot." But in Arabic or in Japanese, you just say one word, "Atsui," and people just understood what you were saying. When it comes to the language of the Quran as a whole, the Quran doesn't say, "Oh, if you doubt that it's from God, then produce a book like it with many rhymes." Like that's not what the challenge is. It says "mithliha," like it. And so I just want to make sure I'm addressing all your points because I'm not writing these down. So I'm just going off my short memory. In regards to your third point about words being invented, there are many words, for example, that were used at the time. And then when people were in the hadith, like they're trying to understand them, it's like, what does this word mean? And I think just because he used a word that maybe we don't understand doesn't necessarily make it factually incorrect. And if we think about it logically, like let's say somebody, I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody was trying to invent their own religion. And they come up and they start speaking language. They start saying things that nobody else understands around them. It doesn't seem like the best way to get followers for your religion. I'm living in 2019. Arabic is not my first language. And when I read the Quran, it's very clear to me, alhamdulillah, like the majority of it. Obviously, there's some words that I don't understand. And so I go to the tafsir and then I ask native speakers. But just reading it as a whole, it is quite clear to me. And in regards to the subjective nature of the challenge, and I agree with you. I think that there are certain things that, for example, like me, I'm studying. Let's say I'm a teacher, okay, and you give your kid a rubric, right? And you say, here's the rubric. How creative were you? Demonstrates creativity. Demonstrates not so much creativity. Demonstrates insightfulness. Explanations are comprehensive. All these things, we write them down on paper, but at the end of the day, there is going to be some level of interpretation. And I do believe in an objective standard for certain things. Like I think some things are inherently right or wrong. And in the same way, some things are inherently powerful and eloquent and some things aren't. So that's kind of how I understand it. And I still pose that challenge because it's not my challenge. Like I don't see like what people need to understand is that I don't necessarily have a personal interest in preserving the Quran. Like it is my faith, obviously, but it's not like I said, "Oh, I'm giving you the challenge." No, the challenge is from God and it's presented to humanity. So that's how I see it. It's like I'm just expressing it, and whoever's willing to take that challenge, I invite them to it.
Okay. Well, I mean, circling back to if it's a subjective challenge and it's got no real measures like what would constitute meeting the challenge, and it's like kind of like somebody could say to him, Shakespeare seems more eloquent than the Quran. Somebody could say somebody else's book is more amazing than the Quran. I mean, you're saying that rhymes per se, but 84% of the Quran is rhyme. You can't run away from this. Just linguistic analysis. And the point is that an omnipotent God would propagate that as the most important, or the pinnacle of his challenge or his miracle work is kind of, it doesn't add up to me.
May I respond to that? Because I forgot to respond to that.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the life of like Jesus and Moses, Moses, according to Islamic belief and other beliefs, he split the sea. Jesus, healed the sick and then did amazing miracles. He brought the dead back to life. These are obviously miracles that you might say in comparison to the Quran, some might say, well, oh, those seem amazing. Now, the reality is even people who saw those miracles, not all of them believed. Right? According to how many disciples did Jesus have? Like 12, depending on what number you're using. But seeing those miracles didn't necessarily equate to believing in God. Now, we might say, why did God leave the Quran with us and not something else that, we could observe? First of all, the Quran says, Inna arsalnaka illa nadiran wa bashira. We just sent you as a warner and as a bringer of good tidings. And he came down with the truth. And the way I see it, why a book as opposed to something else? We live in a literate society. Like majority, and obviously not everywhere in the world is as literate as Canada, and historically people haven't always been literate, but we believe that Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the final messenger. So in order to preserve the message of Islam, and if he's not going to send any more messengers, he's going to preserve the book. And the book is something that can easily be accessed by all people, right? And we have to realize that, yeah, not everybody reads, but people were reciting the Quran, people were memorizing, right? People have memorized it without even, I would imagine, without even being able to read it, right? I memorize a lot of Quran just from listening to it. So I see it as a book because it's something that transgresses time and culture and place as the final messenger. If we were living at a time when there would be more messengers, then you could say, well, yes, Muhammad was sent. Maybe he made the moon, he turned the moon to the sun and flipped the sea upside down, and people saw that at the time, but we can't see that after that,
Well,
right?
one could counter that claim, like, why does God keep showing his best miracles to people that can't record or verify his miracle claims, that are living in this era of superstition and not so scientific literate thousands of years ago? Then secondly, why would like, if you look at the Quran, the content of the Quran itself, I mean, there are many other books preserved that are also religious books, and they're books we can read. So that argument doesn't really add up to me, in a way that why would God just preserve it in the book form?
Do you
Uh,
mean like scriptures? Do you mean like the Bible and the Torah
yeah,
and stuff like that?
there's other books that are in very much conflict with the Quran, and they're also kind of preserved in a way that echo the teachings of the time. Now, when you analyze the content of the Quran, like we were talking about the science, it reflects the cosmological understanding of 7th century Arabia. It reflects let's say, the moral codes of 7th century Arabia. It talks about Muhammad's personal life and his wars and his wives. And then there's these verses of convenient revelations as well, where, like, verses that kind of benefit Muhammad, like him marrying his adopted son's wife, and then him getting a special exception to marry as many women as he wanted, and verses that are coming down where Muhammad's companions just captured women, and then they're being allowed to take them as sex slaves, just because, even though they're still married to their husbands who might still be alive. And there are lots of things, like, you can say that the Quran looks like a very uh, outdated and obsolete book that has preserved the teachings and the understanding, I would say, of the 7th century Arabia, but is not necessarily applicable to all of humanity till the end of times. That's how I see it.
Okay,
Like, for example, like
go
the
ahead.
stories in the Quran itself, like, there's this one in Surah Baqarah. It's very funny, where the piece of dead cow brings a dead body back to life when Moses, that dead person. Then there's these other
Mhm.
stories where he hits the stick, the sea parts, water gushes out of the stone.
Mhm.
Then Abraham gets thrown into the fire, and there's all sorts of these miracle
Mhm.
stories, and there's not really any evidence behind them, and they're kind of almost like copied over from previous books too, like the Bible, and even the creation myths, like we were talking about, echoing the same Sumerian, Greek, and Roman understandings and their stories.
Mhm.
And there's a claim that was put forth by the kuffar, like asatirul awwalin, that these are the
Asatir al-awwalin.
right.
Yeah, they
So they
say the
even
stories
noticed
are, yeah.
uh, they even
What's that?
noticed that.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when I look at the Quran, it's a very 7th century kind of text, and deriving modern values is very difficult. Like, I mean, we can go on. I'll take your. I wanted to ask you one thing, actually, was the preservation of the Quran itself.
Mhm.
Do you propagate it to be like a word for word preservation, no discrepancies? Like, how do you view it?
Absolutely. Like
Uh,
word for word, down to the letter. I do believe there are multiple readings of the Quran, but in
mhm.
terms of the way it was preserved, absolutely. I don't think
Okay.
there's no doubt about it.
Okay, but do you think, like, there's just one Arabic script and the pronunciations are different, but the wording is exactly the same?
Well, I think that if we look at the earliest manuscripts of the Quran, the ones that are available in Yemen and Birmingham, the words are the same, but the I guess the arkan, like the fatha, kasra, all those, they weren't there,
Okay.
right? Because even
Yeah.
today, if you read an Arabic newspaper, they don't Arabs, like native Arabic speakers, they don't need those characters to pronounce the syllables, right? To pronounce the characters. So
Mhm.
but yeah, they were added on later on so that people wouldn't, so that people could have more consistent recitations. But the
Okay.
wording is the same.
I mean, I challenge that too
Mm.
myself, because the wordings differ drastically between the manuscripts, where there's like whole sentences rearranged, their tenses changed completely in between the Sana manuscript, where whole phrases are missing. Then in the Samarkand manuscript, the same thing. I did a presentation on it. I'll just screen share some. I just want to have your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So let me just make sure the screen's a little bigger so you can see. Okay, can you read it?
I can't read the actual manuscript itself.
Okay, no problem. So, like, this was from Sana, one origin of the Quran. There's two Muslims, I
In
believe,
Yemen.
wrote Benghazi, yeah, the Yemeni Quran. And in the lower script, right, we see these discrepancies where right now, this text we have, like, let's say in 2196 of the Quran, it says, don't do not
296.
shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination. But the
Mm.
word ru'usakum isn't actually there in the actual manuscript. Do not shave until the offering reaches its destination. Then in the same words, there's another discrepancy that the normal one we have is faman kana, but the manuscript is fa'in kana ahadun. Okay, and then it
Mm.
lists a bunch of other ones. But what's interesting is there's a huge discrepancy in Surah Baqarah, verse 222, where
Mm.
the whole tense and the structure of the sentence is completely flipped. It's one place that says, I believe the standard one is وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي مَحِيضِهُنَّ وَاعْتَزِلُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَتَطَهَّرُنَ.
Mm.
But the other one says فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا هُنَّ حَتَّى يَتَطَهَّرُنَ. Like the whole sentence structure is flipped. Then, I mean, you can see that the word nar and Jahannam is missing. I mean, if I go.
Yeah, I would like to see this because I've never encountered things that drastic in difference.
Yeah.
So I would like to see these. But in my experience, I was recently taking a course on Islamic world history, and one of the questions we explored was, can we use the Quran not as a scripture, not as a religious document, but as a historical document? Like, can we say that it is accurate enough to tell us about life in 7th century Arabia? And my professor, who, German guy, non-Muslim, he said, yeah, we know with fairly, like, we believe that the Quran has been preserved, and we believe that we can take it as a historical document. And for them, I mean, he's looking at it from a secular world point of view, but for me, from a religious point of view, I see that if a secular person's saying that he can use it accurately to determine the past, then why can't I use it to say that this is indeed what the Muslims were reciting at the time?
No, I think that there's a problem distinction. What he's saying is a historical, as in the sense that did it preserve the history of or the teachings of the time. Yes, it does echo that, like we discussed earlier. But the belief that Muslims have, or like you say, that it's a singular Arabic text that was not changed as it came out of Muhammad's mouth, and that's what we've been reciting, and that's what we have right now. So you are aware of the different rivayas, right? Like the different readings.
There's different recitations. They were even present during the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm aware of them.
But
I don't know them obviously in detail, but I know, for example, some words like you might have an extension, or the word might actually be completely different in some recitings. Because
well, I'll just show you, like, there's actual extra words in some, and then in some there's like a little bit discrepancy, like a meaning does change as well a little bit. Let me screen share these again. Oops. So these are from different riwayat. The Hafs riwayah, the Warsh riwayah, there's the Duri, the Susi. You like about 6 or 7 of these are considered to be authentic, and then some scholars say, oh, there's 10 authentic ones, a total of 14. But what I'm trying to say here is, like, if you notice, like, I can give you the whole file, the slides and everything with the details later on.
Yeah.
Like, one recitation says kutubihi and one kitabihi. Like
I mean, these are very minor differences. Like his books
here,
and his one book.
But like here, like the word huwa is additional in one, and there it's not even existent in the other one.
Yeah. What are the 2 recitations there?
I think it's Warsh here. This one is Hafs and this one is Warsh.
Okay.
I mean, there's
I can look into that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them where, like, sometime, and then the verse numberings are different. Then there's, like, this one strikes me funny. There's where one it says a command that says qul, and the other one it says qala. He said, so in one place Allah is commanding, and then the other rest he's quoting. So that kind of affects it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another fatawakkal wa tawakkal allazina wallazina.
Yeah, these are obviously from an Arabic perspective, these are very minor
Yeah,
differences. They're not like missing
yeah.
verses
Well,
or added verses and all that. Like,
yeah, those are in the manuscripts, and that's another detail. Like, if you go into more detail about the discrepancies and the infighting between the Sahaba as to what should constitute the Quran and what shouldn't,
mm,
is even bigger. Like, if you read books like Kitab al-Masahif
mm,
by Ibn Abi Dawood, or Imam Jalaluddin Suyuti's Al-Itqan or
mm,
Al-Fahrist, they go into detail where abrogation, where hundreds of verses are gone, we're missing them. Sahaba were actually disagreeing. There's one hadith in Tirmidhi where Abdullah bin Masud was dissing on Zayd bin Sabit, saying,
mm,
"Don't listen to the recitation of this man, for he
mm.
was in the loins of his father when I was
Yeah,
hearing the Quran from the Prophet." So there was a lot of infighting, and that kind of also explains why.
they differed in regards to the recitation, but they were told by Uthman radiallahu anhu to defer it back to the Qurayshi recitation. So the way I see it is like when I compare, and this is no way disrespect to any of my Christian brothers and sisters, but when I compare the preservation of the Quran with the preservation of the Bible, there are clear interpolations in the Bible, like historically, where
Yeah, I
stories are
agree.
added, right, and verses are missing. Whereas
Mhm.
in the Quran, I've never seen evidence of that nature. And if you're saying that you have that, then I would really like to see it and study it and come to a conclusion myself.
Yeah, I would say that the Quran is relatively much well preserved in the Bible post Osmanic, but before
Mm.
Osman, there were indeed a bit of discrepancies, because you have allegations of like 2 3 surahs that were in the Quran that have been recorded by eyewitness accounts, but then they're not found in the Quran anymore in Obay's Codex.
Those were two du'as that Muslims still recite today, but they're
Yeah,
not included in the codex.
yeah, and
The
like
language is preserved.
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of discrepancy with that. Um, so I mean, in all essence, when I see the Quran's the content of the Quran and what it propagates, it's a very narrow view that was very centered around 7th century. But it's not a universalist book.
Sorry, just 1 second. I'm
Yeah.
just got someone's knocking. Yeah. Hold on.
All right, guys. So we'll just wait for a little bit till Omar comes back. But for all of you that are watching, if you have any questions, we've been going on for about an hour, 15 minutes. Let me go open the link. Going on for about an hour, 15. So let me look at the questions. Let's see what the chat's saying. So if you have any questions about the Quran, Islam, you can leave them in the comments. I'm reading them right now. And then hopefully if Omar comes back, we'll get back to them. Let's see.
Sorry, just neighbor. Yeah, no
Oh,
worries.
no
Sorry,
problem.
just a neighbor.
All
Yeah.
right.
So what I was thinking, just okay, just for the sake of time, I guess okay. So I forgot the last thing we said was just talking about the preservation. But maybe if you want to have a, I guess Q&A or have people. I don't know how many people are
Yeah.
watching or have people have questions, but yeah.
I was looking at the chat right now. So I'm just going through them. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about the big elephant in the room. Is what does Islam, in your opinion, say about treatment of ex-Muslims? Because I noticed you
Yeah.
made a video about it too.
Yeah.
So one question is the biggest question: should apostates be killed in an Islamic state?
Okay. Great question. I studied this in a lot of detail, and I know a lot of scholars say yes because of the hadith. "Man baddala dinahu faqtuluh." Now, if you just look at the Arabic, "Man baddala dinahu," whoever exchanges his religion, then kill him.
Mhm.
Obviously, that has a meaning that is not apparent in the wording, in that specific wording. Because if you say whoever exchanges his religion, kill them, does that mean that a person who is a Jew or a Christian or an atheist who becomes a Muslim, kill them as well? So obviously we have to go and delve deeper. Um, My opinion, based off, there's clear evidence in the Hadith and the Quran. My opinion is that it's not necessarily the act of disbelieving in your heart, or necessarily just disassociating, or how do I say it? Like, it's not just like, oh, I don't pray, I don't believe, I'm an atheist. The problem comes when it's you not only leave the faith, but you go and wage war, and you go and speak out, and you wage war against Allah and His Messenger. And my evidence for this is a hadith narrated on the authority of Aisha radiallahu anha, that says, لا يحل قتل مسلم إلا في إحدى ثلاثة خاصلة. There is no, it's not permissible to kill a Muslim except in one of three cases. And the third one is, ورجال يخرج من الإسلام فيحارب الله عز وجل ورسوله. And then it gives three I guess, solutions, for lack of a better term, for lack of better wording, فيقتل أو يصلب أو ينفي من الأرض. So that they are killed or crucified or exiled from the land. So this is somebody who leaves the religion and wages war against Allah and His Messenger. And I personally, and if we read the Quran, it's quite consistent with what the Quran says, لا إكراه في الدين, there's no compulsion in the religion. فمن شاء فليؤمن ومن شاء فليكفر. Whoever wills, they can believe. Whoever wills can disbelieve. And to me, this is not problematic. It's in line with our understanding of treason in Canada. The punishment for treason in section, I believe it's either 46 or 64 of the Criminal Code in Canada is life imprisonment. And in that one passage that I read, there's no mention of parole. Whereas murder, you get parole. First degree murder, you get parole after 25 years. So treason is still something that we take very seriously. And historically, people have been put to death for treason, like Louis Riel, who we learn about. So that's my personal opinion, and I think it's backed by evidence from the Quran and Hadith.
Okay, so you're saying, like, for example, if I was living in a caliphate or a Muslim state, a theocracy, and me criticizing Islam and going out of my way to tell people that, hey, Islam is not true, and even though my arguments might be academic, where I'm showing evidence why, I should still be punishable by that.
Well, what I'm saying is it's okay to have questions, because Allah says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. But if you have questions and you're not necessarily, like, you pose them to a scholar, and then let's say they answer them to the best of their ability, but you still don't like them. If you don't like that, and if you just still want to disbelieve, that's, in my opinion, you do you. Then if you're a creation of Allah, and you are a creation of Allah, Allah will deal with you as He wills. But for me to come and attack you or kill you just because you have disbelieved and you don't do anything, then I haven't seen any concrete, or I guess the solution or the punishment that's more in line with my understanding of the Hadith and Quran is that only applies when somebody goes out and wages war against Allah and His Messenger, or speaks out after they've had a chance and they've done all those things. Like somebody who goes out to China and starts disclosing information about Canada and saying this and that and speaking negatively, that kind of thing.
Well, the other problem is tying the religious identity to the national identity will cause this problem to, reverberate and come back. What my question is, for example, if I'm in let's say Pakistan, right, and the state religion is Islam, and I'm telling people, and I'm waging war against Allah, I'm like actually genuinely saying that, listen, I thoroughly don't believe that Islam is the truth.
Yeah.
And I propagate my views, and let's say I form like a church of atheism or something.
Yeah.
And I hold conferences and stuff where I call out Islam. I'm just verbal criticism of the ideology. I'm not inciting any hate against the Muslim community. And that's a very important distinction, that there's a difference between inciting hate against people and then criticizing a set of ideas, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So in that scenario, would that still be classified as irtadad or apostasy and me being killed?
So first of all, as far as I know, Pakistan is not an Islamic caliphate. So I wouldn't use the example of Pakistan necessarily, but in terms of what your actions, the way you describe them, you're not necessarily preaching hate, but you're just saying, like, we don't believe in this and this. What I would personally say, Allah knows best, but I would refer back to the Hadith as well and say that there's three options given: that they are killed or crucified or exiled from the land. Right. And obviously we have to take into consideration everything. And in that situation, and again, I can't speak. I'm not a mufti, and I'm not here to make like legal claims, but I would say God knows best. But that's the hadith I would suggest exploring and looking at.
Okay, so I'm looking at a book called Reliance of the Traveler. I'm pretty sure you've heard about it. It's a 14th century fiqh manual. It's about 1,000-page book, and it has a chapter on apostasy. It's used as a as almost like a reference for Islamic jurisprudence. And I just want you to look at some of the hadiths, or like the opinions of scholars where they're claiming consensus, not only from just the Maliki or the Shafi fiqh, the Hanafi, Hanbalis, and a lot of different ones. So I'm just going to share some of that. I just want you to comment on the...
Sure. If I may, just for the sake of time, because I have to get going soon, but and I get that a lot of scholars do say that this is the Islamic opinion. I would just say that when we talk about apostates and when we refer to hadith, how do we know that somebody is an apostate? We can't look into people's hearts, right? Like we can't look into people's hearts. It's usually actions that let people know. Like for example, yourself and Samir, Abdullah Samir, like you have a YouTube channel, right? So that's how people know. But if you were just at home and not doing anything, like how would people know? And let's say you told me, should I go and tell the caliph and put you to death? Like I don't know. That's not my area of knowledge whatsoever. So I get that, you can give me verses, I'm sure, from different fiqh manuals that say the punishment for apostasy is death. But I would just think about, how do we know that somebody is an apostate?
Well, I mean, like, I could proclaim myself to be an apostate. I'll be like, I'm the kafir that Allah warned you about or something. And then could go on to criticize Islam ideologically. So that's not an issue. But what I'm trying to say, like, for example, let me get back to the screen share. Oh, where did it go? Okay. So, like, for example, I'll read it. I don't think you can see it. It's a little tiny.
I don't think I can, yeah.
Yeah, so it tells you that when a person who has reached puberty and is saying voluntarily apostatizes from Islam, he deserves to be killed. And then it goes on to say, in such a case, it is obligatory for the caliph or his representative to ask him to repent and return to Islam. If he does, it's okay. If he does not, he's immediately killed. And I mean, it goes on even explaining what acts like cause one to leave Islam, where it says like just to revile or Allah and His Messenger in a way, or criticize them, or being sarcastic about Allah's name is enough for one to be considered an apostate. And there's some where it says that to revile the religion of Islam or to deny the existence of angels or jinns in its own is considered an act of apostasy.
Yeah, I mean, this is, we do believe in angels and jinn. I guess, so what I would say here is, and a lot of people turn to Islam and say, oh, backwards and you kill apostates. We need to realize that this isn't something that's strictly in regards to Islam. Like if you read passages of the Bible, it's very, very clear that those who exchange God's glory, they deserve death. Like there are clear passages in both the New Testament and the Old Testament. And Moses, when he came back and the people were worshiping the calf, there was a command to kill them. But I guess I would just go back to the issue of apostasy. Like my understanding, and this is my understanding, and I'm not a mufti, but it's the situation where not somebody just leaves the faith and just sticks to themselves and just does their own thing, but it's when somebody wages war against Allah and His Messenger or starts openly criticizing Islam. And then I refer back to the hadith. There's three solutions. If there was only one in all situations, then perhaps that hadith would have included one. But there's three mentioned. They are killed or crucified or exiled from the land. And I guess just for the sake of time, and I'll let you just finish off, and then I'll end off in about, if we can end off like maximum in 5 minutes, because I got to get ready to go. And then I would just have so if I may make a question to you and every other ex-Muslim out there, and I say this respectfully, and we could continue on and talk about all sorts of things, but my question to you is what does one have to lose from believing in Allah in the last day and just being part of that Muslim community? And I know you can't speak for everybody out there, but maybe you could speak for yourself about
like my experience as in what I went through after leaving Islam.
No, just like what do you have to lose? Like somebody, for me, because obviously it's not the first time, like the thought of atheism has obviously come into my head when I was exploring religion and talking about science and all that and studying science. But I thought like, what do I have to lose from believing in God? Like, let's say that the Islamic narrative, hypothetically speaking, it was all wrong. And when somebody dies, they just go back into the dirt. Okay, you lived, I would say you still could live a fairly good life. You find peace and solace in your prayers. You have a community, you have good food at iftar and stuff like that. Whereas if the other situation, if it was the other situation, let's say that what the atheist discourse says is not true, and the Islamic discourse is true. Like in the afterlife, you'd be a lot worse off. You know what I'm saying? So my question is just like, what is, in your opinion, like, what do you have to lose from becoming a Muslim and practicing your faith?
Okay, so it's the Pascal wager, I would say when one ties oneself to a specific religion and specific book, especially a religion like Islam, where it pushes a book written in the 7th century as a literal word of God, you're also tying all your metaphysical ideas, your understanding of reality to it, and you get stagnated. Then also your morality gets tied to something that was written in the 7th century, and you might be stuck and you might not be able to evolve out of this. It hinders progress. I mean, I can give a few examples, like the application, the Sharia law is like obsolete in our world, in my opinion. Or like for example, like our understanding, let's say, about homosexuality has evolved with science and stuff, and whereas religion would still push them as sinful people, or they should be killed, according to some schools of thought. So I think like religion can stagnate the human discourse quite a bit by tying us to ideas and beliefs that are, firstly, have no grounds to be claimed to be objectively true, and it gives you a false sense of objectivity, which isn't really there, and it affects all different discourses. Like, I mean, it'll affect like how you, like, for example, like in Pakistan and Turkey, we don't even teach evolution in school because of religious bias and religious beliefs. Right? Because if you actually think of it, there's so much evidence behind it, and like it forms the basis of modern biology. I didn't even know what evolution was till I came to Canada, because they never taught us. They just skipped the whole chapter. So it will hinder people in ways that they might not realize. And it also, like, for example, if you see the worst countries for treatment of women, out of the last 20, the worst 20, about 18 of them are Muslim majority, right? And then if you also look at the best, or the happiness index in a lot of countries, you notice that the more religious they get, kind of like it also has a correlation with unhappiness, or people not having the best living standards. And I mean, you can say that atheism has no morality and whatnot, but like if you actually look at the statistics, the crime rate is much lower in, let's say, the Scandinavian countries, or Japan, or Singapore, with the less religiosity too. And there's a lot of these correlations. Obviously, some of them are not objective, or there's other factors,
I mean,
like political, economical, blah, blah. Because you can say that back in the 13th, 14th century, where the Islamic golden age was going on, it was a center and hub of science. And then there's other arguments which say that they suddenly stopped progressing because certain theologians like Ghazali and some other people came up with some interpretations or opinions about, let's say, mathematics, playing with numbers, or certain sciences being the work of shaitan and stuff, right? I mean, I would say, like, I like to know what's true. I care about intellectual honesty and
of course,
intellectual discourse, and that's,
yeah.
I would rather be honest with myself than tie myself to an ideology and then have no reflexivity left.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. I find that, like, I take a slightly different perspective, in the sense that I see our just an example, like our Western notions of right and wrong, and what's legal and illegal, as constantly in flux, constantly changing. And in my opinion, the Quran holds us back to that one objective truth. And that doesn't mean that you can't explore other things, or you can't learn about other things, because the Quran directs you to explore, and to explore the world, and see the demise, I guess, of the people before you, and to reflect on the creation of the universe, and all these things. But I guess the way I would see it is that our senses are so limited to a certain extent that we can't. And you said you're a seeker of truth, and like, I think our senses are so limited that we need something beyond that, or we'll maybe potentially never fully know the truth, right? And that's, I think, in my opinion, where revelation comes in. And I know not everybody agrees that revelation is a thing, but that's kind of the Islamic narrative.
Okay, well, I mean,
Yeah.
are you still okay with the few Q&As, or you want to let's finish
I could
here?
take maybe one more, if that's okay, and then I gotta, yeah. Hopefully
Okay,
it's not a huge topic like that one, but
let me check. So,
there's something that can be answered in like a minute and a
yeah,
half or 2 minutes.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm looking at some of the questions.
sure.
If anybody has any questions, can they put in the chat right now? I don't see many. So, are there any closing remarks from your side that you want to say about? And has your perspective about ex-Muslims changed after having this conversation, and then from the video you made?
Well, I would firstly say I'd like to thank you for posing your ideas in a respectful and civil manner. And I haven't, with certain ex-Muslims, I haven't always gotten the same, I guess, positivity. But for me, it's like it's not the first time I've interacted or I've had these questions. And for me, obviously, I think the natural process for any thinker as they go and explore their faith is to have questions. And the reason I think I'm able to speak to you today about these things and just speak about Islam in general is because I've had questions that I felt like have been answered for me, whereas I think you say that they weren't answered, right? So I would just say that Islam is not, in my opinion, it's actually the opposite of a closed-minded religion. It encourages you to think and reflect. And if anybody has any questions about anything that I've said today or anything about Islam or in general, or if you have any questions whatsoever, just I'm not sure what's the best way. I do have my own YouTube channel, I Am Muslim. I'm not very, very active on that, but you can email me, you can send me something there, or my personal email, I don't mind sharing it. Actually, we set up a new email, askamuslimcanada@gmail.com. You can send any questions you have there, askamuslimcanada@gmail.com. Would you like to say anything, Abdullah? Sorry, yeah, you're the one who's kind of like facilitating the, yeah.
We'll put your channel link
Sure.
and then your Facebook page, Ask a Muslim, as well in the description, so people can reach out to you there.
Yeah.
And from my side, it was a very, very good discussion where it's very polite, like it was reasonable. There was like a very civil, and I love it because both these. It opens me to newer ideas, and it opens you to newer ideas. And I think for the sake of intellectual discourse, this is absolutely necessary. And I've also noticed that the more the scholars that try to shield people from, let's say, looking or researching into Islam from a secular lens are doing more damage than helping the cause. And it isolates the kids, and then when they do find out about these things, they come to the scholars, and scholars are almost ill-prepared. They don't even know about these questions, right? So I really appreciate you doing this. I would actually love to, maybe talk to you more about certain topics. We can talk about the life of Muhammad. You can make this into a series or a couple of more episodes. That'd be amazing. But yeah, this conversation was really amazing, and I wish we have many more of these.
Thank you. Yeah, just let me know, and then I'll try to see when I'm available during my schedule. But yeah, let me know, and I thank you for genuinely for your politeness, and all the best to you.
From my side, it's goodbye. Assalamu alaikum. Allah hafiz.
Salam wa rahmatullah. Oh yeah, that's the Urdu. Yeah, only Pakistani brothers use that one, but awesome. Thank you so much, man. Have a good one.
Thank you so very much.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.